Welcome to the Grandpa Channel. I'm Steve Harris, but my grandkids call me Rivers. Here we ask a simple question. What did life teach you the hard way? Because a lifetime reveals things you can't learn any other way. On this show, we sit down with people who've lived a little, stumbled a little, and learned a few things along the way. Sometimes the stories are funny. Sometimes they're tender. But the best ones carry a little hard-earned wisdom. So pull up a chair, because what a lifetime reveals can steady another. Let me ask you something. Have you ever wished you had just a little bit more of someone who's gone? Maybe their voice, the way they told a story, or that crooked smile that always showed up when they were just about to say something a little salty. Most of us don't think about capturing those things until it's too late. That's why I recently sat down and recorded my life story on video. Not the whole thing, just the good stuff, the messy stuff, the funny stuff, the stuff I don't want my kids and grandkids to forget about me. Planted Media made it so easy. They came to me, set up everything, and then worked their editing voodoo magic and made me look like $1,000,000. If you've ever thought about preserving your story for the people you love, this is the way to do it. Go to plantedmediaco.com. Tell them Rivers sent you, and you'll get a nice little Grandpa Channel discount. All right, back to the show.
There's two things you need in this life, a thick skin and a quick wit.
Welcome to the Grandpa Channel. We have a wonderful guest today, Bob Hansen, who's also known as Consumer Bob and is known and beloved by hundreds of thousands. What are some of the things that have shaped you in your life heretofore?
Well, one, I'll tell you, just because people are going to go, Consumer Bob, where did that come from? And I did a story once. It was actually a Microsoft operating system for kids called Microsoft Bob. And I had a 4 o'clock producer who thought that was hilarious and started calling me Consumer Bob. And so I had the privilege of being in a position where I could help the viewers recover their money, try to be a middleman in trying to resolve issues with merchants and different people. So the Consumer Bob thing just kind of stuck.
Yeah, key moments that have shaped you as a person.
I mean, when you look back, of course, there are so many things that at the time, maybe you knew or didn't know that would be a shaping moment in your life. But one, before I got into television, my first job in the news business was as a copy boy. I worked for the Houston Chronicle, and I was the grunt of the newsroom. The reporters yelled copy, and I went running. And they had the old wire machines. They talk about clip the wires, where they were always banging out news, local news and national news. But my true passion was photography. And so I got to know the Associated Press photographer. Most people know about AP and UPI. It's a news service that has people all over the world, and TV, radio, and newspapers would pay to subscribe to it. So I got to know the Associated Press photographer, a man named Ed, who was quite a legend among photographers. And so I wanted to be a stringer. I wanted to be someone who could go on assignments. So he said to me, okay, well, why don't you go with me on a shoot? So I went with him to a Houston Astros football game, or not Astros.
Oilers.
Shoot. Yeah, the Houston Oilers. They don't exist anymore.
Yeah.
So I'm on the sideline, I'm shooting. Of course, I'm intimidated, but I'm doing my best. 2 cameras are banging together as I'm shooting.
Yeah.
And finally, at halftime, we went up into the AP offices to develop our film. And he developed his film first, and then he put me in the dark room. To my shock, was an it's funny, I want to say operating system, but a system to process your film that I wasn't that familiar with. Well, I was familiar with it, but not proficient at it. I'm sweating my hands and I'm not getting it quite right. And finally I hear this knock on the door and he says, "You all right in there?" I said, yeah, I'm doing it. And of course it's all pitch black. And finally I processed it, dried my film, brought it out to him. Well, for anyone who's ever done this, in some places my film had stuck together because I hadn't done it properly. And so there were big gaps on the film where it didn't process. And Ed took that piece of film, he held it up to the light like this, putting his thumbs on the film. He threw the roll of film to me and hit the floor and fell to the ground. And he looked at me and said, "I thought you were better than that." And I was 20 years old at the time, and I had to turn my head so he wouldn't see the tears welling up in my eyes. I was embarrassed. I was disappointed. And it cut to the quick to have someone say, "I thought you were better than that." Now, as far as the film the next day I got the rolls and the Nicor reels, and I closed my eyes and I'd practice and practice. And it took weeks, but eventually I got back in and eventually got a photo on the wires. But that line has stayed with me, and not just about photography, but just, maybe at that time in my life, I could have been better than I was. And so, it's try not to dwell on it, but every once in a while I hear that voice says, I thought you were better than that. And so it doesn't bring me down. It more like with that roll of film, it challenges me to be better.
It
And so
motivated you.
that's one kind of dramatic instance that happened.
Can you think of another instance that kind of was a moment in time in your life that really kind of,
Oh yeah.
defined you or helped kind of lead you along?
Well, one thing taught me something that has been with me my whole life, and that was my first job in television was part-time for a TV station in Columbia, Missouri. I was a graduate student at the University of Missouri, and they had an NBC station. And I don't exactly remember what the story was, but I went down to the maximum security prison in Jefferson City, the state capital. And I'd never been in a prison at that point in my life. I've since reported a number of them. And I interviewed these inmates. And the thing that shocked me at first is they were all like kids I went to high school with. They didn't look like vicious, like you kind of would characterize people in prison. Most of them just looked like normal people. And they'd done a variety of crimes, some very heinous crimes. But after I was done interviewing them all, I remember walking out of the prison on the grass to the final gate, and I turned to my photographer and I said, it's hard to find a guilty man in a prison. And it's funny, but what it was is everyone had an excuse. No one there, despite what they were in there for. I mean, these people were all in a maximum security prison, never really felt they were bad people. People didn't understand them, or they were justified in what they did, or any number of things. And while I don't deal with inmates on a regular basis, just life in general, everything from my kids to my friends to people I go to church with. No one views themselves as bad. We easily justify our actions. And so, it teaches you, it generally doesn't do you a lot of good to try to tell people, no, you are guilty. It's better to listen to them, to talk, and just realize that we all have our own viewpoint in life, and you have to appreciate that. And while that was an extreme example, I think it served me throughout my life as a reporter and as an individual.
What's something that your kids and grandkids don't fully, this is a loaded question, don't fully understand about you? I'll lead off. I tell my kids that I am a lot funnier than they think I am right now, that they will look back and they will say, oh man, he was so funny. What do you think they don't understand about you?
I don't think that in this 72-year-old body, they realize there's a kid inside. When you look yourself in the mirror, yeah, maybe you're a little more wrinkled, a little, more gray hair and all that sort of thing. But I really don't view myself much different than that 20, 30, 40-year-old. I still try to do physically a lot of things I did then. And granted, I don't do them as well. But I don't know. It just, your mindset doesn't change with your body. It's not equal. Your body's getting older, but the way you view the world, while you're wiser and you have a lot more life experience, I still want to keep learning and enjoying life and getting out there and doing things and just view. Yeah, I think that would be the one thing. And just to realize that no matter how old you get, you'll still have that youth somewhere in there.
Somewhere, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, I will tell people that I find this amazing, by the way, but you still surf, right?
Not as well as I used to.
So,
I've surfed since I was 17 years old, and I grew up in the LA area, so I learned to surf there. I still get out about 3 times a week. I surf at a spot where we all have T-shirts or sweatshirts that we call ourselves the Dawn Patrol. And most of the guys I surf with, they're in their 60s and 70s. And we don't pop up like we used to, but it's a great feeling. It's great to make it through the waves, to sit out there on the board and, instead of talking about, like we used to, talking about who we're dating or what concert we were going to go to, we talk about our prostates or the next doctor's appointment. But it's still an opportunity to just continue to do what I loved and to keep active. And yeah, I still try to make that part of my life.
So I'm not trying to say that this is the thing that you most feel alive doing, but maybe it is. Is there something else that you do that you just feel just like you're lit up, that you're on fire? And maybe it relates to the fact that you've got this, the young man in an older man's body sort of thing. Is there anything
Well,
that you do that you really, yeah.
surfing is certainly one of them because I got up this morning at 5:30 and I was at the beach about 6:15, and it's cold. You're putting on your wetsuit. It's not fun, but that water hits you and you paddle out. Maybe you have to duck under the first wave or whatever, and it is such a clarity moment. The sun comes up and hits your wetsuit, and you get that first wave, and it really is. I think the other thing is good Thai food.
Thai food. Okay. All right.
Sometimes you just leave a Thai restaurant. It was just so marvelous. And you're just thinking,
Uh-huh.
life is so good. There's a place in San Diego that has some salad rolls that are just marvelous with a peanut sauce.
I love the
Uh,
peanut
it-
sauce. Yeah.
yeah. And eat things like that. It's fun to walk. Every Sunday night, we walk on the beach for sunset. I still drive an old VW bus, a 1978 VW bus. Now our line is you don't drive it any further than you're willing to walk. Uh, but it's good. It's fun. It's fun.
Is there something that you believe now, Bob, that you didn't believe at age 30? I mean, we're talking about 42 years. I like to tell people that I have fewer answers to questions at the tender age of 70 than I did when I was 30. But the answers I have are so good that, I mean, it makes up for the growing length of questions that I seem to have.
I think when you're younger, life is a little more black and white.
Mhm.
And as you get older, it has shades of gray. Not that there's a difference between what's right and what's wrong, but when it comes again to people, when it comes to circumstances, you realize that you offer people more slack. If I did something a certain way, my wife would say, "Well, that's just part of his Bobness." And I think with people sometimes you recognize that that's just part of who they are. That's part of his Steveness. And
Yeah.
I think you have more patience or more willing to find the good in people where I might have dismissed someone before. Now I recognize that, we've all been through, especially as we get older, we've
Yeah.
all been through trying things. We've all been things that have shaped us, things that have broken us down a bit. And I think as we get older, we recognize that in people.
Mhm.
And I think that's a
I
good
think
thing.
that I'm finding I have a little more patience at age 70 to find out kind of who somebody's about. I like
Yeah.
to understand what makes somebody tick. I like that about me now rather than back when I was 30. I was probably, well, let me talk. Let me tell you about what I'm doing. But I have noticed that I'm able to see and kind of connect the dots better. You find that you're able to connect dots better at the tender age of 72?
Well, you certainly have life experience to help you realize it's not the end of the world, whatever it is, whatever disappointment, whatever brick wall you may hit, you take it more in stride. And sometimes you have to explain that to younger people. I also like what you said about, as a news reporter, one of the things that you did learn was how to ask good questions and that follow-up questions. You really get great things out of people. I've certainly seen interviews where they're not listening. They don't follow up with what the person just said. You'll have a great response or a leading response, and then they go on to the next question, where just a simple, "What do you mean by that?" Or can you explain that a little further? It was fun to be able to get things out of people. And sometimes the person would admit, they said, I never really talked about that before. It's funny. Sometimes you'll spend your whole time asking someone questions, and they'll tell you what a great conversationalist you are, when in fact you said very little.
I'm genuinely interested in what makes Bob tick. And, I would like to think that I would use that same sort of curiosity with anybody that I'm talking to. It even could be like a checker at a grocery
Yeah.
store, or I
I
just
hear you.
think that there's these potentially wonderful stories that we could find out about if we just were kind and asked a question or two. How many grandkids do you have, Bob?
13.
And what's the age range?
18 to 1.
Oh, wow. You got the soup to nuts
Yeah,
sort of
absolutely.
thing. When your oldest grandson or granddaughter turns 28, 10 years from now, what would you hope sticks with them about their interaction with you as their grandpa?
Well, one, as a person of faith,
Mm.
I would hope that they recognize that I believed, that I had a devout Christian belief system. My wife and I just spent the last 2 years living in New York City, serving what we call a senior mission in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. I never doubted how my parents felt and my grandparents. I knew their actions were based on a Christian belief. And I always recognized that and I always respected it. And it was up to me someday to come to grips with it and decide if I wanted to follow that path and find my own belief system. But one, I would hope that all my grandchildren would see that their grandparents tried to live a Christian life. And and I think we had a good life. And I think they would see it in the way we treated people, how we treated each other. So I would hope when my 18-year-old grandson is 28, and instead of being 72, I'm 82, I hope he
Yeah.
still remembers the life that we lived, how we lived it and why we lived it.
I think that's a great way to answer that. You said that you're a man of faith. Have you had some experiences that you feel comfortable with sharing that have kind of battened down the hatch for your life of faith?
Well, I'll tell you, early on, there's an interesting, a lot of young LDS kids will serve a mission at the time at 18 or 19. And it's not something I really wanted to do. I really didn't have a strong belief system in that area. And there was some external pressure for me to do it. And I talked to my dad about it. And my dad said to me, Bob, don't worry about going on a mission. Just worry about whether you believe that the church is true or not. If you don't, then you won't regret not going. If you do, then you'll go. And so I got to be 19 and 20 and 21 and almost 22, where while a student at UC San Diego here in San Diego, I had some things happen in my life that really got me to start reflecting and taking somewhat influenced by that man in Texas. This is after that. He thought I was better than that. And so I eventually got a witness that the faith I'd grown up with was true and right for me. And so I did serve as a Mormon missionary for 2 years. And I think that, of course, was very profound.
One thing that I did in kind of preparation for this is you retired, was it 3 years ago, 4 years ago?
It'll be 4 years ago in November.
The tributes that you received, they were incredible. And one of the biggest ones is that they said over and over again how much you love people. Now, where does your love of people stem from? Has that something that's grown over time, or were you just coming out of the womb, you were just loving people left and right?
I think as I always loved to talk and chat and share ideas and that sort of thing. I think even going back to high school, where I wrote for the high school paper, and then in college, started working a little bit in filmmaking. And then I had more opportunities than most people because, my gosh, my job was to interview people every day and find specific things about them related often to whatever story I was working on at that time. But if you didn't have a love and admiration for conversation and getting to know people, you just wouldn't survive in the industry. And to find the good in people. And news also is such a, I wasn't sitting in front of a computer all day looking at numbers, which, that's great for people who do that. But I worked in an industry that you had to be able to work. It was very labor intensive. I went out with a photographer every day. I worked with an assignment editor. I worked with a producer of each show. If you couldn't work well with people, if you couldn't be quick to forgive, you just couldn't make it. And so I think my years reporting took something that I maybe innately had, or at least had an interest in, and just put it on steroids, because 40 years, almost a day didn't go by that I didn't have a chance to interview somebody and talk to them and take what they were saying and boil it down into hopefully something that was fair to them.
This is a tough question for you because, you spent 40 years as a consumer advocate. Are there a couple of experiences that really stick out to you of where you knew that you were really helping people or that you were surprised by something in a lovely way?
Stories that changed my life.
Uh-huh.
One is a very tragic story. And I covered the worst drunk driving accident in U.S. history. And I was called out of a church meeting on a Sunday morning. There had been a church-owned school bus coming back from Cincinnati late Saturday night from Six Flags, and there'd been a drunk driver who was driving on the wrong side of the freeway. This bus had tried to turn to avoid it, and the driver hit it right at the area where the bus door opens up. And in that year bus, that's where they had the gas tank. And the entire bus burst into flames, and 27 people never got out alive.
Wow.
And so I spent a week covering that story. I did it for my own television station. I did it for NBC News. I did it for National Public Radio. I got to know those family members. I got to know the kids who survived. I covered the trial a year later. And I was just, it really, well, let me keep going. So I was very good about my reporting. I worked hard at it. I had my work was all over the country. About 6 months after all that was over, the Museum of Broadcasting in New York asked our station if we would put together a compilation of our coverage of that. So the news director asked me if I would do it. So I got all these tapes, and this has been, all our stories were on actual videotape, and I went into a room. I started watching my coverage and the coverage the other people were doing. And all of a sudden, I went from being a news reporter to a viewer. And I was weeping. There's times I had to get out of the room and just dry my eyes. And so all of a sudden, I went from being that closed off, what you had to be, reporter to get the facts and put it on the air, to a viewer who was really witnessing the devastation that was being covered that day and that week and that year. And I'll never forget that. And even when I was first called to be that bishop I told you about, they would talk about there's a mantle, a spiritual thing that happens to you. And to me, the mantle was empathy, because I was not closed off to people, but I kept my distance from my emotions to making certain decisions or how I was in life. And all of a sudden, I find myself, that wall was not there. And I really found I was much more empathetic with what people were going through in their life. And again, that experience covering that accident, I interviewed lots of tragic situations. And then here in San Diego, I got to more help people with their problems.
Mm-hmm.
Not that some weren't dramatic. I had a motorcycle cop who had lost a leg in the line of service, and he had been in a coma, and his wife had been approached by the doctors who said he'll never be able to walk again with that leg. We'd like permission to remove the leg. And she says, I can't make that call. Well, after almost a month, they brought him out of the coma. He really did extremely well, and he rehabbed and tried to walk again. Finally, they realized that you're either going to be in a wheelchair or we can remove the leg and we can be fitted for a prosthesis and walk that way. So he decided to do that. The leg was removed. He contacted his insurance company. People know that life insurance is life and dismemberment. Well, they denied it because they said, well, you turned in the paperwork 90 days after the accident, so you didn't do it soon enough.
Yeah.
And he says, I was trying to recover. I was trying to rehab.
Coma.
I didn't want to do that. Yeah. So I interviewed him because I thought I better put him on camera first. So I interviewed him, and then I contacted the insurance company, and I went through their public relations department, and I started explaining the situation. And the guy on the phone said, should I be sitting down? I said, yeah, you probably should be. So I started explaining it, and he kept going, oh no, oh no, oh no. Well, 2 days later, he had a check for $125,000. Now, it made me feel great that I could step in and be that person. It made me feel bad that he needed someone else, that the corporation he was dealing with couldn't have seen through that and resolved it.
Figure that out.
No, but there were a lot of opportunities where you could kind of be their last hope. And I didn't try to embarrass the company. Sometimes they were big companies, Home Depot, AT&T. Other times they were a small business. I just tried to be a middleman, a mediator who could sit there and try to bring both sides together. I tried to be fair to both sides. And so that was a unique situation. And those kind of stories, they made you feel good about life. And there were stories, again, where you saw people, they're worse, but then sometimes you saw people. I covered a hurricane in Jamaica once, and I couldn't believe the attitude of the people. I'm apologizing to what they're facing, and they're just saying, "Oh, no problem, no problem." And they just took it in stride. And I thought, I wish I could be more that way at times.
So maybe the last question for you, this is maybe the toughest one too, is do you have a sentence or two that would capture your life philosophy?
You know, it's funny. I do have something I've told all my kids, and I still think it's pretty good. I said, there's two things you need in this life: a thick skin and a quick wit. And I hold by that. I think, don't be so quick to be offended. And the quick wit is sometimes you just kind of got to laugh things off.
I think that's fantastic. Well, I can't tell you how much I've enjoyed this interview,
Thank
Bob,
you.
but I just want to thank you for coming and coming on board for the podcast. And what a life well lived is how I would describe it.
Well, Steve, let's
So,
hope there's a lot more living ahead.
yeah, I hope that that's the case. That's it for today's episode of the Grandpa Channel. If something you heard made you laugh, pause, or see life a little differently, pass it along. We're gathering the lessons people learned the hard way, the stories, the second thoughts, and the wisdom that only comes with time. And we'd love to hear yours. What did life teach you the hard way? Until next time, keep the perspective honest and the stories coming. I'm Rivers, and I'm out of here.